At my mother's funeral, my sister who stole my fiancé flashed her ring saying, "Poor you, still alone at 38. I got the man, the money, and the mansion." I smiled and called my husband over. The moment I saw Stephanie's smug expression as she entered the funeral home with Marcus, my former fiancé, I felt something I hadn't expected: complete calm. 6 years had passed since she'd destroyed my engagement 3 months before my wedding, and here she was, still trying to prove she'd won some imaginary competition. What she didn't realize was that the woman standing before her was no longer the broken-hearted marketing executive who'd fled Boston in shame. I was now Rebecca Foster, Senior Vice President of Digital Strategy at Hartwell & Associates, earning $340,000 annually with a 7-figure investment portfolio. More importantly, I was married to Zachary Foster, whose tech investment firm had just closed a $50 million fund. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on me. Zachary had been Marcus's biggest business rival for years, and Marcus had no idea who he was about to meet. When Stephanie pulled me aside into that small morning room, her designer dress and diamond jewelry were meant to intimidate. She twisted that familiar engagement ring, my former ring, around her finger as she delivered her rehearsed speech about their Cape Cod summer house and Marcus's supposed business success. But I'd done my homework through my network of financial analysts and business contacts. Marcus's company was hemorrhaging money, leveraged to the breaking point with failed acquisitions. The summer house was mortgaged beyond its value, and their lifestyle was a carefully constructed facade built on mounting debt. "Poor you, still alone at 38, she said, with that practiced cruelty. "I got the man, the money, and the mansion." The familiar pain flared for perhaps a second before being replaced by something much more satisfying: the knowledge that everything she'd just said was not only wrong, but laughably false. I smiled genuinely for the first time all day. "Have you met my husband yet?" The confusion that flickered across her face was delicious. In 6 years of minimal family contact, she'd apparently never bothered to learn the details of my new life. Mother had been discreet about my marriage, respecting my wishes to keep Stephanie at a distance, so this moment was going to be even more perfect than I'd anticipated. "Zachary," I called, opening the door to find him waiting respectfully nearby, having given me space to handle whatever family drama was unfolding. "Come meet my sister." As Zachary entered the small room, Marcus appeared behind him, clearly having been monitoring our interaction from a distance. The moment the two men made eye contact, Marcus's confident businessman demeanor cracked like thin ice. "Foster," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, all color draining from his face. "Reynolds," Zachary replied with professional coolness, his tone carrying the weight of years of business rivalry. "It's been what, 7 years? Not since Macintosh acquired Innotech instead of your client CompuServe, right?" The recognition hit Stephanie like a physical blow. "Zachary Foster?" she repeated slowly, her voice catching. "As in Foster Investments?" "The same," Zachary confirmed, slipping his arm around my waist in a gesture of both affection and unmistakable claim. "Rebecca and I met at a tech conference in San Francisco 3 years ago." Marcus was visibly struggling to process this information. Zachary Foster wasn't just successful. He was Marcus's most prominent business rival, the investor who had systematically outmaneuvered Marcus's firm in deal after deal. While Marcus's company had backed failing startups and made increasingly desperate acquisition attempts, Zachary had built a reputation for identifying winners early. His fund's portfolio companies had generated over $2 billion in exits in the past 5 years alone. "You two are married?" Marcus managed, his voice cracking slightly. 2 wonderful years now, I confirmed, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice. "Zachary's been incredibly supportive of my career advancement. I just received another promotion, actually. Senior VP now with equity stakes in 3 of our major client accounts." The implications were hitting both Marcus and Stephanie simultaneously. Not only had I not remained the broken victim they'd left behind, but I'd married Marcus's most successful competitor and achieved a level of professional success that matched their pretensions. Except mine was real. Stephanie's carefully composed mask was slipping. We didn't know you'd remarried. There's quite a lot you don't know, I replied evenly. For instance, did you know that Zachary's firm passed on investing in Marcus's company twice in the past 3 years? The due diligence reports were illuminating. Marcus's face went from pale to ashen. The business world of tech investing was small, and everyone knew everyone's numbers. If Zachary had seen Marcus's books, he knew exactly how precarious their financial situation really was. Zachary, ever the professional, maintained his diplomatic composure. Marcus, perhaps we should focus on supporting Rebecca today. This is about honoring her mother's memory. But Marcus was clearly struggling with more than just surprise. His company's recent struggles were industry knowledge, and standing next to one of the most successful investors in Boston was highlighting every poor decision he'd made since stealing my fiancé had seemed like such a victory. The funeral director appeared then, informing us that the service was about to begin. As we returned to the main room, I could hear the whispers following us. The business community attendees were clearly recognizing the connection between Zachary and Marcus, and the story was spreading through the funeral home like wildfire. We had just taken our seats in the front row when my father clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. The stress of seeing Stephanie and Marcus, combined with his grief and his heart condition, was overwhelming his system. "Dad," I cried, as Zachary immediately moved to help, his crisis management instincts taking over. Within moments, he'd assessed the situation, called for medical assistance from among the attendees, and helped move Father to a private room where a doctor could examine him. Stephanie followed us, and for 20 minutes her earlier smugness was replaced by genuine concern for our father. The brief medical crisis created an unexpected truce between us, united by worry for the man who'd raised us both. When the doctor determined it was stress rather than another heart attack, and Father insisted on proceeding with Mother's service, we returned to the main room with a temporary ceasefire in place. The funeral itself was beautiful and heartbreaking. I delivered a eulogy highlighting Mother's strength, kindness, and unwavering love for her family. When Stephanie rose to speak after me, she faltered after only a few sentences, overwhelmed by genuine grief. Without thinking, I moved to support her, placing a steadying hand on her back. "It's okay," I whispered. "Take your time." She gathered herself and completed her tribute with stories from our childhood that brought both tears and gentle laughter from the attendees. For those few minutes, we were simply two daughters honoring their mother, the years of hurt temporarily set aside. At the cemetery, while rain fell softly as we laid Mother to rest, I noticed Marcus standing apart from the main group, repeatedly checking his watch and phone. Even at a funeral, he couldn't disconnect from what I suspected were increasingly desperate business calls. Stephanie remained close to Father's side, her earlier bravado completely replaced by raw grief. The reception at my childhood home was crowded with well-wishers, and Marcus's discomfort became even more apparent as several business associates engaged Zachary in animated conversations. I overheard fragments about market trends, successful exits, and strategic investments, conversations that clearly highlighted the difference between Zachary's thriving firm and Marcus's struggling company. Throughout the day, I maintained the dignity Mother would have expected, focusing on supporting Father and honoring her memory rather than dwelling on old wounds. But as guests began departing, I caught Stephanie watching me from across the room, her expression unreadable, but somehow softer than it had been in years. The next day, Zachary needed to return to Chicago for a crucial board meeting with one of his portfolio companies. "Are you sure you'll be okay if I go?" he asked while packing his overnight bag. "I can reschedule if you need me here." "Dad needs help sorting through Mom's things," I explained. "I should stay a few more days. I'll be fine." After seeing Zachary off at the airport, I returned to find Father sitting in Mother's garden with a photo album open on his lap. "She labeled everything," he said, showing me Mother's neat handwriting beneath each photo. "Said someday we'd appreciate knowing who was who." That afternoon, I began the painful task of sorting through Mother's closet. Each dress held memories. The blue one from my college graduation, the floral print she wore to Sunday brunches, the elegant gray she'd chosen for my engagement party with Marcus. I found myself talking to her as I worked, telling her about my life in Chicago, my career success, my happiness with Zachary. In her bedside drawer, I discovered a leather-bound journal containing periodic entries over the past decade. Many mentioned her daughters, her hopes for our reconciliation, her sadness at the rift between us. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before her death, read, "My greatest regret is leaving with my girls still estranged. Eleanor always fixed things, but I couldn't fix this. I pray they find their way back to each other somehow." The doorbell rang as I wiped away tears. Through the front window, I saw Stephanie standing alone on the porch. No sign of Marcus's car in the driveway. Father had gone to his brother's house for dinner, leaving me to face my sister alone. "Hi," she said simply when I opened the door. "Can I come in?" In the kitchen, I made coffee while Stephanie sat silently at the table. She looked different without Marcus beside her. Smaller, somehow less artificially composed. The expensive facade seemed exhausting to maintain. "Where's Marcus?" I finally asked, placing a mug before her. "At home. He doesn't know I'm here." She wrapped her hands around the mug without drinking. I told him I needed space after the funeral. The silence stretched between us, years of unspoken words creating an almost physical barrier. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she finally said. "What I said in that room at the funeral home was cruel and completely inappropriate." I nodded, acknowledging her apology without immediately accepting it. "I saw Mom's journal," she continued. "Dad showed it to me last night. Her last wish was for us to reconcile." "I found it too," I replied. "But reconciliation requires more than just proximity, Stephanie. It needs honesty." She looked up, tears filling her eyes. "You want honesty? Here's honesty. I'm miserable, Rebecca. Have been almost since the beginning." The dam broke then, words pouring out between sobs. Marcus had changed shortly after their wedding, becoming controlling and critical. His business had been struggling for years, each new acquisition an attempt to save a sinking ship. The houses, cars, and vacations were all leveraged against mounting debt. Their marriage was a carefully constructed facade maintained for business connections and social standing. "He monitors my spending, checks my phone, questions my every movement," she admitted. "The Marcus you knew doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did." "Why stay?" I asked. "Shame," she answered immediately. "How could I admit what I'd done to you? Destroyed our family for something that turned out to be a mirage. And then there's the prenup. If I leave, I get nothing." I pushed Mother's journal across the table. "Read the rest of her entries." As Stephanie read, fresh tears flowed. She looked up eventually, her face raw with emotion. She knew. She saw through everything. "Mom always did," I agreed. "I've hated myself for years," Stephanie whispered. "Every time Mom mentioned you, every accomplishment she proudly shared, I felt the weight of what I'd done. I'm planning to leave him, Rebecca. I've been secretly consulting a lawyer." My feelings were complicated. Vindication mixed with unexpected compassion. The sister who had caused me such pain was suffering consequences I wouldn't have wished on anyone. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know the truth before I blow up my life again." We spent the next hours looking through Mother's belongings together, sharing memories both painful and precious. Stephanie recalled Mother teaching us to bake cookies, how she never mixed separate batches because I liked chocolate chip and she preferred sugar cookies. "Remember how she used to leave notes in our lunch boxes?" Stephanie asked, smiling through tears. Different messages every day, I nodded. She never repeated one. We weren't instantly healed. The wounds were too deep for immediate closure. But as evening fell, something had shifted between us. Mother's love was creating a fragile bridge across years of hurt. "What will you do?" I asked as Stephanie prepared to leave. "File for divorce when my lawyer says the timing is right. Rent a small apartment, start over." She paused at the door. "What about you? Will you go back to Chicago?" "Yes, my life is there now, with Zachary." "You seem happy," she said, a statement rather than a question. "I am. Truly happy." "I'm glad. One of us should be." We hugged briefly, awkwardly, before she left. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Back in Chicago, I settled into life with renewed appreciation for what Zachary and I had built together. Our brownstone, my corner office overlooking the river, the respect I'd earned in my industry. All of it felt more precious having seen the hollow facade Stephanie and Marcus were desperately maintaining. 6 months after Mother's funeral, I discovered I was pregnant after years of trying. The joy was tempered with sadness that Mother wouldn't meet her grandchild, but I felt her presence in quiet moments, her wisdom guiding me toward motherhood. Stephanie and I maintained cautious contact through occasional phone calls. True to her word, she had filed for divorce and moved into a modest apartment, finding work at a small marketing firm. The gossip and judgment she faced in Boston social circles was difficult, but she seemed determined to rebuild authentically. Through my business network, I learned that Marcus's company had indeed collapsed within 8 months of our encounter. The leveraged acquisitions, mounting debt, and failed strategic decisions had finally caught up with him. He'd been forced to declare bankruptcy, losing the Beacon Hill house, the Cape Cod property, and most of their material possessions. The divorce proceedings were ugly, with both parties fighting over assets that barely existed. Meanwhile, Zachary's firm continued thriving. His latest fund had grown to $75 million, with portfolio companies generating record returns. My own career had reached new heights. I'd been recruited by a Fortune 500 company as Chief Marketing Officer, with a compensation package that would have seemed impossible during those dark days in Boston. The path that led me here was never one I would have chosen. Losing Marcus had seemed like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning of a far better one. With Zachary, I found not just love, but partnership, respect, and unwavering support that made me stronger rather than smaller. As I sat in our nursery, watching Zachary paint the walls a soft green, I thought about the lessons I would someday share with our child, how loss can lead to discovery, how endings create space for new beginnings, how the hardest moments often redirect us toward our truest path. My life had become richer and more authentic than I could have imagined during those devastating days 6 years ago, not despite the betrayal, but because of how it forced me to rebuild with greater wisdom and clearer priorities.